Hey guys, how are you? When Israel stood at the edge of the Promised Land, they were told that 7 nations greater and mightier than they were stood in their way. 7 adversaries guarding the inheritance. But these enemies weren't just historical nations. Scripture uses the pattern of 7 adversaries again and again, as if to say that the true obstacle is never simply flesh and blood, but the forces, the vices, and the lies that stand between us and God. The question the Bible keeps pressing is this: will we reach that goal? Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who you think might find it helpful. Recently, in the Torah portion ʻEkev, we begin in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verse 12. And it starts out like this: Therefore it shall come to pass, if you hearken to these judgments, and keep and do them, that the Lord your God shall keep unto you the covenant and the mercy which he swore unto your fathers. Now, the name of that Torah portion is called ʻEkev, and it's translated in a variety of different ways depending on the Bible translation you're using. Sometimes it can be translated as because, or if, on account of, or in consequence of, or reward, as it is in the Stone Edition Chumash that I often used. And the etymology of ʻEkev, not to be confused with entomology, the study of insects, we're talking about etymology, the study of word origins. It comes from the root ʻAkev, that means hill, as in to follow at the hill. And so this is going to be connected to a lot of words and concepts. It might make you think of, hopefully it will, Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, that the serpent is told by the Almighty when he's handing out the curses that you will bruise his heel. That is the seed of the woman, which we understand to be the Messiah, the seed of the woman. That phraseology is also used in like Revelation chapter 12. Also in Genesis chapter 25 verse 26, when Jacob and Esau are born, you'll remember that they're twins and that Esau came out first red and hairy. Afterward, Jacob came out with his hand upon Esau's heel. And so the word there is ʻEkev. It's related to this word from where we get the Torah portion ʻEkev, and meaning heel. So basically, Jacob's name, Jacob in Hebrew, is Yaakov. The first letter of his name is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Yud, that in the ancient meaning of that word, it means hand, as in the word for hand is Yod. And so in the second part of his name that I mentioned is ʻEkev. They named him Yaakov because he grasped hold of Esau's heel, or his ʻEkev. And so Jacob's name means hand on the heel. And so it calls to mind this idea of grasping toward a goal, or in his case toward the blessing and the birthright, and he was willing to do whatever he could to obtain that, and he ultimately did do that. So looking a little bit deeper at this concept of ʻEkev, or going back to the ʻEkev of the heel, it represents the end or outcome of something, because the heel is the last part of the body to pass as you walk. So metaphorically, it became a symbol of the end or aftermath or final result. That's where the sense of goal, focus, or conclusion comes from. And so, interestingly, we have a term in philosophy, or often used in theology, called teleology. And the word teleology comes from the Greek word telos. And so that word is going to appear a fair amount of times in the New Testament, that can mean end or goal or purpose. And logos, the last part of that word, means word, reason, discourse, study of. So a lot of words like psychology, sociology, zoology, a lot of those words are That's going to go back to the Greek word logos. And so teleology is the study of ends, purposes, or goals. Seeing things not only in terms of how they work, but in terms of why and what they are for. Ākev and teleology are connected. And so, as we've discussed, ākev can mean because or as a result of, and heel and all of that. The connection to heel is crucial because the heel literally is the end of the body, in a sense, the lower or back part. And metaphorically, it's going to deal with an outcome or a final consequence or the goal of something. So when Deuteronomy 7:12, the very first verse in the Torah portion, ākev, begins, and it shall be when you listen, or you shema, the word ākev doesn't just mean because or reward or if in a casual way. It carries with it the nuance of teleology. What is the end goal or outcome of obedience? What follows the consequence, the telos, of keeping God's covenant? The telos, or the ultimate goal or purpose of an apple seed, is to become a mature tree that bears apples. That is its teleology. The seed is not meant to remain a seed forever, but to reach its fulfillment in fruitfulness. This illustrates teleology beautifully because the seed contains the full potential, its nature, its essence of what it's supposed to become. The tree full of apples is the actualization, its goal or end. Everything in between, growth, struggle, seasons, is the process of moving toward that end or purpose. In Romans chapter 10, verse 4, a very familiar verse, often very misunderstood, says, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." And so the word translated in there is this Greek word telos that can mean to end or terminate in some cases. But as I've said, it also can mean a fulfillment, a goal, or purpose. And that's the way Paul means it in this place, that the law reaches its climax or its goal in Christ. Paul uses telos in both senses, though. So if you look at the actual context in Romans 9, for example, through 10, Paul is contrasting Israel's pursuit of righteousness by the law versus by faith. And so he's pointing out that the whole goal, it should be pointing toward the Messiah. He also talked about how the law is good, the law is holy, that without the law he would know what sin was. John says, whoever sins transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. And so that's the way the Bible defines sin, is missing the mark or transgressing the law. Paul said that he was blameless. And so he's drawn a distinction there between the approach for righteousness, not eliminating the standard of righteousness, okay? And so he's saying the law is a path with a destination, and that destination is Messiah. So in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 12, we begin that it shall come to pass, if you hearken to these judgments and keep and do them, that the Lord your God shall keep unto you the covenant and mercy which he swore to your forefathers. And then it's going to talk about these different blessings that will be the result of the obedience, and that he will bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your land, your corn, your wine, your oil, the increase of your cattle, and all of that. Basically, it's going to say that it says there won't be any barren among you. No male or female shall be barren among you or among your cattle. So basically, and also in verse 15, the Lord will take away from you all sickness and will not put any of the evil diseases of Egypt, which you have known, upon you, but he will lay them upon those that hate you. And so basically he's saying, if you will be obedient to the commandments he's given with the right approach, then you're going to be fruitful and productive in every area of your life. And so when we go back to the beginning, early on in Genesis, like in Genesis chapter 3, verse 14, we see that God handed out these curses after Adam and Eve, or Chava, had eaten of the mixed tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, because you've done this, you're going to be upon your belly, and you're going to eat dust the rest of your life, and you're going to be cursed above all cattle and all the other animals, and so on. And then it says that he would put enmity between the seed of the serpent and the woman that I mentioned earlier, and that the woman's curse is that I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception, and in sorrow you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be toward your husband, and he shall rule over you. And so, that's been a source of contention ever since, I think. And to Adam, it says, because you hearken to the voice of your wife, and you've eaten of the tree that I command you not to eat. It says that thorns and thistles shall it bring forth from you, the ground. The ground will be cursed for your sake. In sorrow you shall eat of it all the days of your life. And in the sweat of your face shall you eat bread, and till you return unto the ground, for out of it you were taken, and so on. So, in other words, the curses upon man and woman, upon humankind, is that productivity and producing is going to be difficult. And whereas before, our labor and our work would flow and just really be blessed, and you wouldn't have a lot of the obstacles and things thwarting your progress in your development and your productivity, now there's going to be a lot of challenges to that, and it's going to be real difficult. But in the Torah portion, ʻEkev, we see just that, in contrast to the way that in the Garden of Eden these curses on productivity occurred through disobedience. Likewise, through obedience, it is going to bring about fruitfulness and productivity. And so it goes on in this passage to talk about these 7 nations that are going to be in the land, that they're going to, right now they're in the wilderness in that passage, and Moses is getting them ready to go over and possess their inheritance. And Moses is going to, his job will end at the Jordan River at that particular boundary. And then Yehoshua, or Joshua, is going to lead them forward. So the Torah, the law, is to get them to Yehoshua so that he can bring them in and establish the kingdom for Israel. So I hope that's making sense there, that Moses wasn't meant to bring them in and cause them to possess the kingdom. That is the one, like Moses, Yehoshua, the name Yeshua is just a shortened form of Yehoshua or Joshua. And so in the Hebrew Bible, or the Tanakh, or what Christians usually refer to as the Old Testament, the land of Canaan was inhabited by 7 nations, each with a name carrying significant meaning. Here's an overview of these names that I'd like to get into, and there is some ambiguity and differences of opinion as to the meaning of and interpretations of these names. So some of this is just what I think it is, and so I hope it's going to be beneficial, and I hope these interpretations will offer some sort of insight into the characteristics and the lifestyles of these ancient groups and what they represent, reflecting their social roles as well as their symbolic meaning attributed to their names. And so the first one that I'd like to mention is the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, sometimes that particular tribe or nation is just used as a representation of all 7, similar to the Amorites. Sometimes, like in Genesis chapter 15, when God is making the covenant of the pieces with Abraham, he refers to the Amorites, and he says that your seed, your descendants, are going to be oppressed for 400 years, and in the 4th generation they will come out and they're going to spoil that nation that oppressed them. It said, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. And so I've talked about this quite a bit, that the Creator is the epitome of efficiency. And so he has a lot of different, sometimes I picture it like a stove, and you probably experienced this, or maybe have observed someone that has. And so if you're cooking some sort of big meal, some big special meal, that some of the things are going to take longer to cook than others, and so you're going to start certain things earlier, and some things won't take very long, and so you'll put those on later on in the process. So what you're wanting is everything to be finished at the same time. And so like what happens is we see in Genesis 15 is that once the judgment is full for the Amorites, it's going to be simultaneous with the time of redemption for Israel. And so it's kind of amazing how, so basically these two pans of food become ready at the same time, or scales, or whatever type of metaphor or analogy you'd like to use, that the time of the judgment of one is also simultaneously the time of redemption and deliverance for the other. And so the Canaanites, the meaning of that word seems to have to do with the idea of greed or lust for money and a base material desire. And it can have to do with the idea of the bend the knee in subjugation or humiliation or humility. And I think that this is kind of what I think it represents. And I want to just mention real quickly, one of the themes that I talk about constantly is that we're in a reality of dualities, I often say. And so everything is a polarity. And so this is a very key thing that needs to be understood in really every area that usually is missed. And so everything has two poles. And so we have to take that in consideration. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a half truth. And so if we begin to look at things in terms of a spectrum, I think it helps a lot. We're going to get a much clearer picture. And so I think that, well, let me mention this right quick too. The term Canaanite is linked to the idea of merchants or traders. And so I think that it represents on some level materialism and low living, which can lead to compromise of one's identity and values. So it represents an inner enemy. Each of these inhabitants, or each of these 7 nations, represents a different type of internal psycho-spiritual stronghold. And so I believe that the Canaanite represents this attachment to materialism and a fixation on the physical and material like most people have, to where they are often oblivious and blind to the spiritual realm. And so they begin to become carnal, fleshly, and connected to the material, and not spiritual at all. And I also tend to think that maybe it could represent an inferiority complex, or that a lot of these types of challenges. And so often we don't mean to, but we may compromise our integrity or trade our birthright for instant gratification like Esau did. The second one that I'd like to talk about is the Hittite, or sometimes it refers to them as the children of Heth, or Het. And it means terror or fear. And so that's kind of a one that probably everyone struggles with at some time or another. So it represents, I believe, an inner enemy that sometimes can be a paralyzing fear that keeps a person from living in faith and freedom. Anxiety disorders, nervousness, just different fears and phobias that sometimes keep us trapped or from reaching the full potential or fruitfulness of our God-given inheritance. And let's see here. The third one is the Hivites. And the trait, or what I believe it symbolically means, is I think it represents, on one of the things, is hedonism, or the temporary pursuit of pleasure, or the indulgence of the senses, egoism that is all about self. And I think all of these things have that probably in common. So the etymology is uncertain, but it seems to have to do with the idea of a tent dweller or villager, implying a nomadic or rural existence. And it may be connected to the word for life, or hava, and could be interpreted as chasing after a life of sensuality. I've even wondered personally if it might have to do with, in some way, the idea of group conformity and the collective consciousness, and becoming like the culture around us, and the pressure to conform and be part of the group, and again, in the process, end up compromising your integrity, or who you are, who you should be. The fourth one are the parasites, and it has this idea of meaning villagers are dwellers in open country. And what I believe that it may represent is an insecurity and lack of boundaries, or also unrestrained behaviors or lawlessness, and also the inability to maintain your personal boundaries. If you have that problem, which a lot of people do, it probably, the spirit of the parasites has a stronghold in you in that way, and that you haven't yet maybe conquered that part to where you can maintain your proper God-given boundaries in different situations and establish healthy boundaries for yourself. On the other hand, at the other end of the spectrum, I think it may mean, or there could be a proclivity for people who lack self-discipline, or the recognition of other people's boundaries that are getting out of their lane. So again, each one of these things I think could go to either of the poles or either extreme, whether it manifests in a way to where you're a person who gets out of your lane, and or a person who is unable to maintain proper boundaries. So I hope that helps. The fifth one are the Girgashites. It's derived from Girgashi, the fifth son of Canaan, and the name's exact meaning is unclear, but it's often associated with dwelling in clay or soils, possibly symbolizing instability or earthiness, related to clay or mud, again, materialism. And I think it also could represent this idea of loneliness and alienation. And so some interpretations suggest that the Girgashites signify earthiness, drawing individuals toward worldly desires and potentially leading them to a sense of spiritual isolation. So again, I think that this inner enemy may manifest, or may be a root cause of being overly attached to physical comforts and being unable to rise to your spiritual potential. The sixth one is the Amorites. And so it's going to come from this Hebrew root, amar, which means to say or speak. We actually have a Torah portion in the book of Leviticus called emor, that means say. And so it has to do with this idea of speaking, and it can and sometimes is thought of as prideful speech, or someone who is very boastful and prideful in their talk. But I also think that this may be, and I think that it's one of the things that makes this one of the most insidious and dangerous strongholds, is that everybody has dealt with, and probably on a regular basis deals with, voices in your head. And I don't necessarily mean, really hearing voices. Well, I mean, some of that can be a little bit ambiguous. But we all hear voices in our head from time to time, and you see this play out sometimes, that people maybe make a mistake and they might say, well, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I've done that. And so often that inner voice is basically, if you pull the string and begin to analyze it, is going to go back to a parent or authority figure. Often that may be a parent or authority figure like a pastor or teacher that made you feel insecure, made you feel stupid, that you didn't have any value. And so those voices can be very powerful and play in your head and tell you that you're not good enough and you're never going to be good enough. Or I think also they can, again, the other pole or the other end of the spectrum, they could materialize in a hubristic or arrogant way, to where it's a voice that tells you that you're better than other people. Well, look at them, I'm better than them. So I think that that's basically the nature of the Amorites, is that it's distorted talk, whether it manifests as inferiority, something that's telling you that, kind of trying to keep you down and tell you that you can't achieve what God means for you to achieve, or that it manifests in a superior way, to where you or a prideful or boastful expression of I'm better than them, and or a gossip or that kind of thing. And let's see, I believe we have one more maybe. Which one did do there? That was the Amorites. Now we have the Jebusites, the final one, and that's where the city Jebus, that is the ancient name for Jerusalem, that means threshing floor, from the word bus or bus, that means to trample or despise. And I think that this could symbolize a place of judgment or separation. And the Jebusites, I think, may represent a victim mentality. In other words, again, depending upon the pole that we're looking at here, that carries with it this idea of being trodden down. And so if you're a person that's been stepped on by others, or, in the course of your life, it could be that you have this stronghold, this Jebusite stronghold within, that, similar to one of the other ones that we talked about, keeps you from being able to maintain your proper God-given boundaries and possess the land that God gave to you. So just real quickly, the promised land represents the full potential or kingdom of within. The Torah is not just a book of narratives and laws, which it is on one level, but also it's a roadmap for the soul, roadmap of the soul. And so a lot of these things, like the seven inhabitants, there is a relationship between as above, so below, and also that which is without and that which is within. So there's a relationship, and again, as I talk about all the time, micro and macro. So like in the book of Revelation, we see that there's a beast with 7 heads that represents these 7 kingdoms. And so we see this theme in a lot of places, that that Israel is ruled by these 7 major kingdoms throughout the ages. And so, but also there's this difficulty internally with these 7 inhabitants of the land. And so we've got these 7 macro kingdoms and 7 micro kingdoms within and without. And so let's see, the Jebusites, I think that it may have to do with this idea of feelings of worthlessness, and again, insecurity and that sort of thing. Or again, I think it could manifest on the other end of the spectrum of whether we're talking about rejection, feeling trampled down, or despondency. I think it could manifest as a self-exaltation thing as well. Okay, and I believe that's all of them. I want to real quickly, because connect a bunch of dots for you, and then maybe you can go back and look at this a little bit later in more detail. So we can't look, we've got to learn to not just look at one thing in isolation, but see how everything connects. And so all these things are going to connect. So in the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, 16 through 19, it says, there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 are an abomination to him. So it says that those things are haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are hasty to run to evil, a false witness that breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. And so this is basically different parts of the body, okay? And I believe, and not just me that believes this, there's other Jewish sources that point this out. I didn't know it at first until it was something that the Spirit connected for me. And so I believe that each of these 7 abominations that God hates correspond to each an attribute of each of these 7 inhabitants of the land of Canaan that are blocking Israel from achieving their full potential and inheritance. It represents what I believe are internal spiritual strongholds. So this theme of these 7 adversaries echoes in the New Testament as well in a lot of different places. You know, it talks about these a spirit being cast out and it brings back 7 more evil than himself, or the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. I think that it's going to connect to this. Or you might remember that the Sadducees, who didn't believe in angels or didn't believe in the resurrection, they gave Yeshua a scenario of 7 husbands married to one lady. And so say this guy married a lady and he dies and she married his brother, and so on. So we have this mosaic that continues to appear of 7 heads, or 7 guys, 7 mountains, 7 inhabitants, 7 abominations. And also we have in the New Testament, Luke tells us that among the women who followed Yeshua was this lady called Mary of Magdala, or Mary Magdalene. And it says that out of her, Yeshua cast 7 devils. That's in Luke 8:2. And Mark adds that when Yeshua was risen early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he cast 7 devils. And so I believe Mary Magdalene is an archetypal picture of the bride of Christ, also of the land of Canaan. I think there's a connection between these things. And so he, like Yehoshua, drove out the 7 inhabitants of the land out of the bride, okay? And so again, we've got these mosaics and themes that continue to occur, and the antithesis of that, I'll hit on just a couple of things. We have what's called the 7 species of the land of Canaan, or the Shavat Hamim. And so we have wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates, or sometimes it might be translated as honey. And so these are the 7 fruits, or 7 species that are set apart in the land of Canaan. And I think that these are the antithesis of the abominations that the 7 inhabitants, or 7 nations, represent. So we have on one hand the 7 nations, or 7 abominations, and then we have the antithetical fruit nation, or the inner trait of that spiritual stronghold. Likewise, in the book of Revelation, we have the 7 churches, or the 7 assemblies, as well as the 7 spirits of God. And so I believe that each of these 7 churches are going to be connected in some way to the 7 nations and the seven species and all of that, in that the challenge that each of these 7 churches have to overcome, I believe, is going to be dominated by one of those spiritual strongholds that were in the land of Canaan. So I hope that that gives you some things to think about. So essentially, the letters of the churches function as a mirror of the soul's journey, showing both pitfalls, or the inner outer, and the remedies of the faith, perseverance, love, and humility needed to cultivate the values represented by the 7 species. So when we reflect on the 7 nations and the 7 devils, we see more than just history or isolated events. We see a pattern of total opposition that must give way to total obedience. The goal, the telos, is not merely survival, but transformation into a people wholly devoted to God. And this is where it challenges us today. What are the nations or devils that still resist in us? Where are we called to drive out compromise so that obedience may have its perfect work? Thank you so much for joining me today. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who you think might be encouraged by these insights. Together, let's continue to press toward the end, the telos, that God has in mind for us, to walk in obedience and to be made whole in Him. Thank you very much. Hope to see you real soon.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.